Wait, there was like a new scam that CoffeeZilla uncovered that he uncapped.
Two of the largest bank failures in history happened this week. But before we talk about why, I have a question. Why is Jim Cramer so good at being so bad at his job? Just months before they both collapsed, he said this.
These are never, ever talked about. Why? Because it's too boring? I like to make money. Boring is good. Watch out for Signature Bank. That's my fave. SVB Financial, don't you want? This company's a merchant bank with a deposit base that Wall Street had been mistakenly concerned about. This morning, we witnessed the second largest bank failure in American history, which naturally created a wave of fear as the day went on. Hence the Dow ultimately losing 345 points, S&P falling 1.45%, and the Nasdaq tumbling 1.76%.
Now I have to.
I'm telling you, when you thought, I'm not sure if anybody's ever watched Jim Cramer, but I'm not joking when I said he had like the big soundboard with the goofy buttons, with the goofy ass dumbass sounds. That's his thing. That's how he keeps the boomers awake while he's talking about how they could ruin their 401ks. I like his buttons. I want them. You may be able to put better work with them than better work. You may be able to put them to better work than he does, because honestly, he has no clue what he's doing. Apparently,
to admit he has a way with sound effects. Now I understand why they call it Mad Money. But there is one thing Jim Cramer isn't wrong about, which I know is shocking. Fear is in the air, and many are worrying, is my bank safe? So today I thought we'd break it all down, the recent collapses, why the government has announced a special bailout, why some people are happy with it and others are mad, and of course, what's next.
I will say, there's not necessarily like the biggest reason to be scared. A lot of you, me included, don't have enough money to lose in the bank if it busts. So you probably shouldn't be too scared, if I'm gonna be honest.
Let's start with the facts. 3 major banks in the United States have failed in a short period of time: Silvergate, Signature Bank, and Silicon Valley Bank. Now, Silvergate was the smallest with about 11 billion in assets. Signature was like the mid-sized one, and Silicon Valley Bank was the largest. Now, Silvergate and Signature Bank were well known in the crypto space, while Silicon Valley Bank was massive in the tech startup world. However, despite their differences, these banks failed for similar reasons at a high level, which is this: they all experienced a run on the banks when too many people demand too much money too fast, and the banks don't have cash on hand. Now, I want to make something clear. It would be easy to draw the comparison to the crypto crash in 2022 when several crypto companies like FTX collapsed, but there's an important difference. Companies like FTX were insolvent. When there was a run on their banks, they had no money to give. Whereas the banks we're talking about were illiquid, meaning they had the money, but when they had the bank run, some of it was locked up in long-term assets like bonds. Now, to be clear, these are not the same things at all. But things can get a little fuzzy in the details. For example, when a bank run happens, what can start as a liquidity problem can become an insolvency problem if the bank has to sell what they have for cash. And let me explain. One of the safest investments is considered to be treasury bonds. Your grandparents probably invest in it. Banks invest in them, both for the same reason. They provide a stable rate of return. So say you're Signature Bank, right? You've got billions of dollars in customer assets. Where do you put it? Well, into treasury bonds, which let's say earn you 1% a year. You keep some cash on hand for withdrawals, but you figure, look, if I need to sell these, I can sell my bonds, right? But what happens if interest rates rise really quickly? Well, suddenly you have this 5-year bond you bought a year ago, which gives you 1% a year. But now the government is selling the same 5-year bond and offering 5%. Because of that, now your bond's value on the open market drops. It's no longer even worth what you paid for it because it's giving less interest than other bonds. And so if you try to sell that, well, now you lose money. Now, to be clear, if you held the bond to maturity, well, you would still make that 1% and not lose anything. But when depositors are asking for cash, it's simply not an option to hold on. Now, I know that seems complicated, but the essence of it is this. Banks were forced to sell long-term assets that they didn't want to sell, like bonds, and they took losses because of these bank runs. Because of that, what started as a liquidity crisis became an insolvency crisis, and that's why they got shut down. Because
Dude, so I recently sold some stocks because I have like some money in the stock market, not like a crazy amount. I'm not like hidden Warren Buffett or anything, but I have like some money in the stock market, and I pulled like a couple dollars out today because I was like, this isn't going anywhere. A lot of these are going straight down. A lot of these are going like straight down. And I was like, I'm just gonna keep losing money on these if I don't like get rid of like the stock that I like the most was the one that was like going down some of the most. It's like this Indian bank that I've been invested in for quite some time, and it just kind of fell apart. And a lot of the banks that I have, a lot of the stocks that I'm in are like high cap mutual funds and things like that. And ETFs. Like this one ETF that I'm invested in, Invesco S&P 500, high dividend, low volatility. Bro, I've lost $40. Sorry, what? I've lost $50 on it. Now that is only 12%, but that's a lot of percents, if I'm gonna be honest. Now it has like made up for it a little bit because it has like a pretty tasty dividend that I get once a month. But with that being said, like things have been like falling apart. Like for the last year, like none of these stocks for the last year, like the stock market's been pretty terrible. I also have some money in bonds. When I got the money that I got back from that I loaned out to people, I put some of it in I bonds, if you guys know what those are. And I mean like that's been nice. And when I say nice, I mean the money is disappeared and the federal government is using it for, you know, God knows what. But they promised to give me more of it back one day. One day. I have to keep it in there for like 6 months, I think. Minimum. I actually have no clue how long I kept it in there. Wait a sec, I should probably check that out, shouldn't I? Wait, I should probably, because I gave them like a couple of dollars. I should probably see if they're gonna give me the money back. I would like to. I think that'd be nice, actually, if I'm gonna be completely honest with you.
Is they weren't going to be able to service all those withdrawals. So now what, right? Doesn't the government guarantee bank deposits? Why are we even talking about this? Well, they kind of do. The FDIC insures up to $250,000 per account. However, at places like Silicon Valley Bank, they had a lot of accounts with a lot more than that. Because as we spoke of, they hosted a lot of venture capital startups that might have had anywhere from $10 to $50 million in there. And suddenly that company, which was healthy yesterday, now can't get access to that money and can't meet payroll because their bank had failed. And this triggered a huge response from many in Silicon Valley to call for depositors to have their money guaranteed, with people like Jason Calacanis saying, you should be absolute.
Dude, this was so funny. Did you guys see this? So this guy, Jason Calacanis or whatever his name is on Twitter simply Jason, because he's been like finance bro tweeting since 2006. This guy makes like tweet after tweet after tweet about how the federal government is cringe and how the government's like terrible and how like normal banks are and how like the government just like makes things worse. But then like the second those like venture capitalist banks start falling apart, he's like, POTUS! Yellen, do something, please!
Absolutely terrified right now. That is the proper reaction to a bank run and contagion. Guarantee all deposits up to $10 million or this will spiral into chaos. And comments like this sparked a huge debate on whether the government should or would get involved. Ultimately, with the answer coming on Sunday when the U.S. Treasury said this, quote, depositors will have access to all of their money. And there you have it. The U.S. government is stepping in to save not only Silicon Valley Bank, but also Signature Bank as well. They did this citing a systemic risk exception, which really boils down to a single idea. Please don't panic, guys. Please don't take out your money. Ultimately, the U.S. government doesn't want you worried about your bank deposits. However, not everyone saw this as a win. Many were quick to point out that once again, the government only seems to step in to help a certain type of person. Quote, Mark Cuban, bail out Silicon Valley Bank tonight. Feds, approved. Goldman Sachs needs $824 billion. Approved. JP Morgan Chase needs $416 billion. Approved. Average Joe, my wife has cancer. Can we get Medicare? We're broke. Now, I do have to tell you that those in favor of the Fed's action will tell you that this is an
True! Hello? Base department? That's crazy. Who is that guy? True, that's pretty true. Dude, we're always like pulling random like wads of cash out of like Lady Liberty's pussy. Whenever it's war memes or whenever it's bailing out banks. or companies. But the second people are like, man, I wish I could pay for my like child's leukemia treatment, they're like, man, sounds like a personal problem. Ever heard of GoFundMe?
Fair characterization that it's not the super rich getting bailed out. They'll point out that this isn't a traditional bailout at all because it only applies to the depositors and that executives and shareholders will get nothing. And that sounds good, except for the fact that some executives and shareholders in Silicon Valley Bank had already cashed out, with Greg Becker, the CEO, selling $3.6 million worth of his shares right before their collapse. And this gets even worse.
That sounds
when you
like
consider
that sounds like trading, but the craziest part of the trading is that it's from the inside. That's weird how that works, isn't it? You're telling me 2 weeks before the bank collapsed, after they knew that they were almost completely insolvent, that he got rid of all of his all of his shares gone just like that? That's curious. That's a peculiar thing to believe, is it not? Strange.
That Greg Becker was one of the people who lobbied to deregulate his own bank. According to Heather Landy of Courts, quote, the ability of these banks to fly under the radar in the U.S. was no accident. Greg Becker, SVB CEO, lobbied U.S. officials several years ago to raise the asset threshold at which banks would be considered systemically important. So let's get this straight. They faced less regulatory scrutiny because they weren't systemically important, according to them, but when everything goes wrong, they're systemically risky and must be bailed out. It's a classic case of wanting it both ways. Now, again, this isn't the same as the full bailouts we saw in 2008. And regardless of whether you land on whether there should have been or should not have been a bailout, the idea that systemically risky banks should get special treatment and regular banks, I guess, don't, sends a pretty clear signal. If you're rich, you should move your money into banks that are too big to fail. Otherwise, you run a systemic risk of ending up on Jim Cramer, feeling like this.
So true. Oh, sorry. I didn't see you there. If you're enjoying the content, hit the subscribe button. If you don't, it'll make Boo very sad. I know a bunch of you who are watching are not subscribed. Join the frenzy. You won't regret it. Thank you, Boo.